The biting wind was a constant companion in Sara's life, more loyal than any member of the Moonstone Pack. It tore at the thin, patched cloak she wore and whipped her long, unbound hair across her face as she hunched over a pile of firewood, her fingers perpetually chapped and raw, struggling to tie the rough twine around the bundle. The scent of sizzling venison and warm hearth smoke wafted from the main lodge, a cruel aromatic tease that made her stomach rumble with a familiar, dull ache. Tonight, like every night, she would eat last if there was anything left. They called her Whisper, not for any gentle quality, but for the quiet contempt she inspired. Her eyes, often downcast, held a haunted depth, a reflection of the profound emptiness where her memories should have been. She had no recollection of her parents, no family, no past before the pack grudgingly took her in as a child. She was just here, a burden, a shadow, an anomaly, still fumbling. Orphan, the voice, sharp as a winter icicle, belonged to Lena, a she-wolf whose sneer was almost as constant as the wind. Lena's rich, dark fur gleamed, a stark contrast to Sara's dull, thin coat, and her eyes, always too keen, seemed to delight in prodding at Sara's vulnerabilities. Some of us actually contribute, not just breathe the pack's air. Sara's jaw tightened, a familiar knot of shame and resentment forming in her chest. She kept her gaze fixed on the tangled wood, refusing to meet Lena's mocking stare. Every taunt, every dismissive glance was a shard of ice chipping away at the fragile hope she tried to maintain. Her perceived uselessness, stemming from her amnesia, was a constant, heavy weight. What was the point of remembering when her present was this endless cycle of quiet degradation? She often wished the forest would simply swallow her whole, or that a rogue storm would sweep her away, anything but this slow, daily suffocation. Yet, deep down, a stubborn spark of defiance flickered. She endured. She always had. Survival was her only true talent, a grim, unspoken strength she carried like a hidden weapon. Suddenly, a shadow fell over her, not Lena's. It was the imposing figure of Alpha Thorn, his presence radiating a chilling authority that made the very air crackle. He rarely noticed Sara, a testament to her invisibility within the pack. Today, however, his eyes, usually cold and calculating, held a glint of something sharper, something almost predatory. Beside him stood his beta, Garrick, a hulking wolf whose massive frame seemed to drink the meager light, his expression unreadable. Sara's heart leaped into her throat, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. Alpha Thorn's voice, a low growl that vibrated in her bones, echoed through the quiet clearing. "Sara, come. The council wishes to speak with you." His tone wasn't a request. It was a command carrying an unusual finality, a chilling certainty that went beyond a simple summons. Something was very, very wrong. A cold premonition, like the touch of death, snaked up her spine. This wasn't about missing dinner or poorly tied firewood. This was about her, and the dread that settled in her chest promised it wouldn't be good. The whispers of the pack faded, replaced by the deafening thrum of her own fear. Chapter 2. The Unspoken Price. The Alpha's den, usually a place of booming laughter and the warm scent of prosperity, today reeked of stale ambition and something else, a metallic tang of desperation that made Sara's hackles rise. Alpha Thorn sat on his raised stone throne, carved from a gnarled oak, his eyes now like chips of flint, entirely devoid of warmth. Beta Garrick, a silent, imposing sentinel, stood beside him, his shadow encompassing the flickering torchlight, making Sara feel even smaller, more insignificant. Other council members, Their faces grim and unyielding lined the walls, their gazes like dull, accusatory weights. Sara, Alpha Thorn began, his voice a low growl that seemed to vibrate in the very stones beneath her feet. Our pack faces a grave challenge, an ancient debt, a blood debt. Sara's breath caught, a cold knot forming in her stomach. Blood debt. The words tasted like ash on her tongue, conjuring images of ancestral curses and unavoidable fates. She didn't know what scared her more, the ominous words themselves, or the chillingly resolute look on Thorn's face. It was the look of a wolf making a difficult but utterly decided kill, with no room for hesitation or mercy. "What kind of debt, Alpha?" she managed to whisper, her voice thin and fragile, barely audible in the heavy silence. Her primary goal was to understand, to brace herself for whatever terrifying truth was about to be unveiled. Garrick stepped forward, his massive frame blocking out even more light, casting Sara into deeper shadow. His voice, a low rumble, seemed to shake the very air. "A debt to the Lycan King, girl. 5 seasons ago, our elders, your so-called kin, made a pact. They traded a promise for protection. A promise that has come due. Protection from what?" Another gaping hole in her understanding, another unanswered question that clawed at her already fractured mind. Sara's thoughts raced, trying to grasp the implications, the sheer enormity of a debt owed to a Lycan king. She knew the legends. The Lycans were not just larger, stronger shifters, but beings of ancient power, their lineage stretching back to the dawn of the wolf. They were feared, revered, and rarely seen. A surge of panic, hot and desperate, welled within her. Her instincts screamed to flee, to run as far and as fast as her legs could carry her. But where would she go? She had no one, nowhere. The world beyond the Moonstone Pack was a terrifying unknown, and even here, she was alone. The words formed on her tongue, bitter and sharp, even before Thorn confirmed them. "I am a payment." The realization hit her with the force of a physical blow, leaving her breathless, her world tilting precariously. Thorn nodded slowly, his gaze unyielding, devoid of mercy. "You are an offering. The king requires a bride. Our pack has no suitable unmated females of stature. But you," his eyes swept over her, a dismissive glance that stripped away any last vestige of her humanity. "No family to mourn you, no ties to bind us. Your memory is a blank slate. You are easily forgotten. A clean slate for a new beginning with the Lycan King." He made her sound like a discarded tool, a broken possession, not a living, breathing being with hopes and fears. The casual dismissal, the utter indifference to her fate, cut through her shock, leaving a cold, hollow space in her chest. She knew she was an outcast, a pariah, but to be traded like cattle, like a forgotten piece of property. It stripped away any lingering hope of belonging, any illusion that she might one day find a place within the Moonstone Pack. Whispers, like the buzzing of disturbed insects, rippled through the council members. "The beast, they say he's truly gone feral. His castle is a tomb. A monster, not a king." Sara felt a chill deeper than the winter air outside. She wasn't just traded. She was sentenced to a fate whispered about in terrified tones, a life with a monster in a tomb. Her mind, so often empty, now filled with a singular, terrifying image, a vast, dark castle and the chilling, golden eyes of a beast. She clenched her fists, her nails digging into her palms. Her breath hitched. This was worse than dying. This was being erased, sacrificed for the sins of a pack that had never truly claimed her. Chapter 3. The Journey to the Tomb. The morning air bit with a vengeance, colder and sharper than any day Sara had known. Two grim-faced warriors, their faces shrouded by deep hoods, stood waiting for her outside Alpha Thorn's den. They were not from her pack, not truly. Their loyalty was to Thorn, and their silence was absolute. A worn leather satchel, containing little more than a coarse, scratchy cloak and a half-loaf of stale bread, was thrust into her trembling hands. This was it. There was no going back. No last goodbyes, no lingering glances from anyone who might care. She was being erased, physically removed, just as her past had been. The journey began in a silence heavier than the snow that crunched beneath their boots. The path soon veered away from the familiar, snow-dusted forest trails she knew so well. They left behind the towering pines and the comforting, if distant, scent of her pack. Instead, they moved onto open, desolate plains, vast stretches of frozen tundra, where the wind howled an endless, mournful lament. It whipped Sara's hair, lashing her face with tiny shards of ice, stinging her exposed skin. Every step was a lonely crunch in the fresh, unbroken snow, a stark, desolate sound that echoed the emptiness in her soul. She tried to cling to any memory of her old life, of her pack, of a time before this terrifying sentence. But her mind remained stubbornly blank, a dark, empty pit refusing to yield its secrets. She clutched the worn satchel to her chest, its rough fabric her only comfort. Maybe her parents, whoever they were, had known love. Maybe they had held her just as tightly. A flicker of warmth, a ghostly touch, then gone, swallowed by the cold reality of her present. Hours bled into days. They passed crumbling stone structures, ancient ruins half buried by vast drifts of snow. Each one felt haunted, their silent, skeletal forms casting long, eerie shadows under the bruised winter sky. Sara shivered, not just from the cold that gnawed at her bones, but from an unsettling sense of foreboding. These places, these forgotten stones, they felt familiar in a way she couldn't grasp, like a half-forgotten dream that lingered just beyond the edge of her consciousness. Why did her chest ache when she saw them? A strange, profound sorrow stirring within her. A tiny seed of fear, darker than the deepest shadows, began to sprout within her. This place, this desolate landscape, it felt like it knew her, recognized something in her that she herself had lost. This was more than just a punishment. This was something deeper, something she couldn't name, a terrifying truth that hovered at the edges of her perception, threatening to plunge her into a madness more profound than her amnesia. She kept it locked away, a terrifying secret. Then, just as the sky darkened to an inky, bruised purple, it appeared. Far on the horizon, massive and terrifying, silhouetted against the last dying light, stood the Lycan King's castle. Its spires, jagged and black, clawed at the clouds like skeletal fingers, twisted and menacing. It looked less like a home and more like a mausoleum carved from ice and shadow, an ancient horror made manifest. Her blood ran cold, a glacial river in her veins. This wasn't just a place of dread. It was a place of broken things. What followed was a stark, chilling realization. She wasn't just going to a king. She was going to a tomb. Her tomb. Chapter 4. The Beast's Shadow. The heavy iron gate scraped open, with a groan that seemed to tear at the cold, still air. Its rusty hinges shrieked a lament, and then with a clang that echoed endlessly, it slammed shut behind Sara, severing her last tenuous link to the outside world. She stood alone in the vast, empty courtyard, a solitary figure swallowed by the immensity of the castle. The wind, a biting phantom, swirled snow around her feet, dancing with her breath, which plumed in frantic white clouds in the frigid air. This castle, looming like a jagged, obsidian mountain range, felt alive with a silent, ancient malevolence that seeped from its very stones. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird desperate for escape, but there was nowhere to fly. She stepped inside, one hesitant foot at a time, drawn by an unseen, undeniable force. The grand entrance hall was immense, shadowed, and even colder than the outside. Tapestries, brittle with age and riddled with holes, hung in tatters from the impossibly high walls, fragments of forgotten glory. Dust motes danced in the sparse, weak light that filtered through grimy, arched windows, illuminating nothing but decay. Each step on the cold, unforgiving stone floor sent an unsettling echo through the cavernous space, a lonely testament to her presence in this desolate tomb. Where was the king? The question pulsed in her mind, a frantic, desperate beat against the silence. What kind of king lived in such a ruined, desolate place, a monument to forgotten pain? The whispers of the pack, the beast, a tomb, resurfaced, chilling her to the bone. Then, a sound. It wasn't a human cough, nor the familiar bark of a wolf. It was a guttural rumble, deep and primal, a vibration that seemed to rise from the very foundations of the castle, resonating through the stone and up into Sara's bones. Sara froze, every muscle tensed, every instinct screaming danger. The air thickened, growing heavy and oppressive. A shadow detached itself from the deeper darkness at the far end of the hall, immense and terrifying. It moved with a terrifying grace, too large, too powerful to be anything but what the whispers had warned her of. A Lycan, not fully shifted, not human, but something in between, a hulking, savage beast. Its fur was matted and dark, its claws long and wickedly sharp, and its teeth, she could see them glinting even in the gloom, a stark white menace. This was no king in any human sense. This was a monster. Its eyes, however, were the true horror. Molten gold, they burned with a raw, agonizing torment, a suffering so profound it seemed to pull at the very fabric of her soul. As if pulled by an invisible string, their eyes locked. In that moment, a flicker ignited deep within Sara. Not just fear, but a profound, unsettling recognition, a sense of familiarity that both terrified and mystified her. Her own body moved on instinct, stepping back, her breath caught in her throat. The beast stalked her, circling slowly, deliberately, a predator assessing its prey. A low growl rose from its chest, not overtly threatening, but filled with a sorrow so profound it echoed the mournful howls she'd heard stories of, tales of Lycans broken by their curses. It raised a massive paw, not to strike, but to slam against a stone pillar with a resounding crack, a sound of pure, frustrated agony that resonated with something deep within her. Then, just as quickly as it appeared, it turned, melting back into the shadows, leaving her alone, trembling but miraculously, terrifyingly alive. Her immediate goal was clear: find a hiding place. Anything to escape this terrifying guardian, this tormented, golden-eyed ghost of a king. Chapter 5. Whispers in the Ruins. That night, sleep was a cruel joke. Sara huddled in a forgotten servant's pantry, a cramped space smelling faintly of dust and dried herbs. Her teeth chattered, but it wasn't just the cold that gnawed at her. The beast's golden eyes haunted her, burning behind her eyelids with that raw, agonizing torment. Why had they felt so familiar? It was a maddening question that circled endlessly in her mind, a relentless current in the dark ocean of her lost memories. Maybe it was fate that her past was gone. If she remembered something so terrible, she was certain she'd go mad. In the hours that followed, driven by an instinct for survival and a desperate need to avoid the beast, Sara began to explore the castle, moving like a ghost through the labyrinthine halls. Each grand room was a monument to decay. Elegant tapestries, once vibrant, hung in shreds like old, forgotten dreams. Shattered furniture lay scattered like broken bones, remnants of a life violently interrupted. Claw marks, deep and savage, gouged the stone walls and scarred ancient wooden doors. These marks spoke of raw, untamed power, of an immense rage barely contained. Yet, amidst the destruction, she found strange, almost human remnants. A beautifully carved wooden bird, half buried under rubble, its delicate wings intact. A delicate silver hair comb, intricately designed, resting on a dust-covered window ledge. These tiny things seemed so out of place, so fragile against the backdrop of ruin. They felt like whispers of a life, of a king who had once lived here, perhaps even loved here, before the beast took hold. Her stomach growled, a hollow ache that reminded her of her primal needs. She needed food, water. Her very survival depended on it. She imagined fleeing, running away from the desolate castle, back to her pack. But then she remembered the sneer on Alpha Thorn's face, the cold indifference of her pack, the casual way she'd been treated. Where would she go? She was truly alone. Even so, a desperate determination sparked within her, fragile but potent. She wouldn't just sit here and freeze. She wouldn't starve. She wouldn't surrender to despair. This wasn't her end. She would fight, even if it was just against the creeping cold and the gnawing hunger. As the silence stretched, she imagined the beast. Was it watching her, stalking her, a silent, unseen predator? Or was it just as much a prisoner as she was, trapped in this crumbling fortress, bound by its curse? She didn't know what scared her more, the beast's raw power, or the mournful howls that occasionally echoed through the castle, sounds of profound sorrow that seemed to carry the weight of centuries. Her chest ached with a strange mix of fear and an unexpected, unsettling sympathy. The ache pulled at something deep inside her, a thread connecting her own hidden pain to the beast's obvious torment. It was a terrifying, undeniable connection. Chapter 6. A shared hunger. Her thirst was a burning in her throat, a sandpaper dryness that made swallowing difficult. Her stomach cramped with hunger, a hollow, persistent ache that overshadowed even her fear. These primal needs, insistent and undeniable, finally forced her out of her hiding spot, pushing her past the suffocating dread of the beast. Survival demanded action. She found her way to a neglected kitchen pantry, drawn by a faint, earthy smell. The door, heavy with disuse, groaned on its rusted hinges as she pushed it open. Inside, covered in layers of dust and cobwebs, she discovered a few moldy roots in a single cracked earthenware jug that held a meager amount of brackish water. It wasn't much, but it was enough to keep the gnawing hunger and thirst at bay for a little longer. As she cautiously chewed on a piece of the fibrous root, savoring the meager sustenance, she heard it again. The heavy, shuffling steps of the beast. They were close, closer than they had ever been before. Her breath caught, a silent gasp of terror. Instead of freezing in place, her instincts, honed by years of being an outcast, took over. She pulled herself quickly behind an overturned stone table, a massive slab that offered a precarious shield. From her vantage point, peering through a narrow crack, she watched. The beast lumbered into the adjacent, ruined dining hall. It wasn't looking for her. It was pacing back and forth, a massive, dark silhouette against the faint light from the grimy windows, a trapped animal in a cage too large for it. Its head hung low, its powerful shoulders slumped. From there, it moved slowly to a dusty, faded tapestry hanging on the wall, a tattered remnant of what might have once been a vibrant hunting scene. It sniffed at the ancient fabric, a low whimper escaping its throat, a sound of profound desolation, not aggression. It wasn't just a monster. It was tormented. It was suffering. A new goal, unexpected and terrifying, began to form in Sara's mind. She had to understand. She had to learn. She wouldn't be a victim, passively awaiting her fate. She would be an observer, a student of her terrifying jailer. Because of that, a tiny spark of courage, fragile but undeniably real, flickered within her. This beast, so terrifying in its power, was also clearly suffering. Maybe she could figure it out. How could she survive if she didn't try to understand the creature that held her captive? As the silence roared around her, she noticed something else, a deep, festering wound on its flank, partially hidden by its matted fur, dark and swollen. It looked incredibly painful, raw, and infected. The sight made her stomach churn with a strange mixture of disgust and a nascent, unsettling sympathy. A strange idea took root, audacious and utterly mad. What if she could help it? It was a crazy thought, a desperate gamble, but it refused to leave her mind. It wasn't about trust. It was about survival. If she could alleviate its pain, perhaps it would be less dangerous, less prone to unpredictable outbursts of agony. Perhaps she could show it she wasn't a threat, that she was something different from the wolves who had sent her here. Before she could fully process the terrifying implications of her thought, the beast shifted, letting out a frustrated groan. It collapsed onto the floor, a massive heap of fur and misery, its breathing ragged. In the stillness that followed, Sara, moving with agonizing slowness, took a piece of the dried root from her satchel. With every heartbeat thrumming in her ears, she crept to the edge of her hiding spot. She placed the root and a small, cracked bowl of water, carefully cleaned, a few feet from the sleeping beast. She didn't know if it would be accepted. She didn't know if it would attack her for the gesture. She didn't know what would happen next. She only knew she had to try. Chapter 7. Silent Offerings. The scent of stale air and ancient stone had become Sara's constant companion in the vast, cold emptiness of the castle. Every morning, before the weak light of the sun managed to pierce the frosty, grimy windows, she began her ritual. Her heart still pounded with a frantic rhythm, a drumbeat of fear and adrenaline, but it was a familiar beat now, no longer completely overwhelming. She would gather what meager food she could find. More dry roots, perhaps a sliver of preserved meat she'd discovered in a forgotten, dust-choked pantry, and leave it in the desolate dining hall near the grand, broken fireplace, the place where she'd first encountered him. This spot felt somehow less threatening, less like a direct confrontation. She always spoke softly, her voice a fragile ribbon in the vast silence, as if not to startle a skittish deer. "Just some food for you," she'd murmur, her words simple offerings just like the food. "I hope you find it." She hoped they conveyed peace, not fear, a quiet gesture of something akin to understanding. After that, she would retreat quickly, melting back into the shadows behind a crumbling archway, her breath held tight in her chest. She listened, straining her ears for any sound, any movement. No matter how hard she tried, she rarely saw the beast. But when she returned later, the food would be gone, always gone. This routine became her anchor, her only steady point in the terrifying, frozen castle. It wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about building a bridge, however small, to the wild, tormented thing that owned this desolate place. She learned his patterns, his shadowy movements. He seemed to prefer the shadowy western wing during the day, where the weak winter light barely touched the stone, a place of deeper gloom. At night, his restless pacing echoed through the eastern corridors, a mournful symphony of a trapped spirit, a heavy tread that spoke of endless suffering. What followed was a strange sense of companionship, an unspoken connection, even without seeing him. She was feeding a ghost, a legend, but a living one, a creature of raw power and profound sorrow. The knowledge that he accepted her offerings, even in her absence, filled her with a fragile sense of purpose, a reason to face another bitter, empty day in the castle. One evening, as the sky outside bled from bruised purple to inky black, Sara left a small portion of a wild hare she'd managed to trap near the beast's favored alcove. She watched, hidden in the deepest shadows, for what felt like hours, the cold seeping into her bones. Then, a low rumble, a sound that vibrated through the floorboards. The beast, all Lycan King, emerged from the darkest shadows. His fur, thick and dark as midnight, seemed to absorb the meager light, making him almost invisible. He moved with a lumbering grace, a powerful, ancient presence. He sniffed the air, his massive head lifting, tasting the subtle currents. He didn't look at the food first. Instead, his golden eyes, still burning with that primal anguish, swept over the alcove where she usually hid, lingering there for a long moment, as if he knew she was near. He paused, then dipped his head, tearing at the meat with a surprising gentleness. Then he did something that made Sara's breath hitch, her heart skip a beat. He carefully pushed the empty bowl back with his nose, nudging it forward a few inches. A deliberate act, a response. The silence roared around her, thick with unspoken meaning. It was a terrifying grace. The carefully returned bowl sent a shiver down Sara's spine. It wasn't just a sign of acceptance. It felt like a silent acknowledgement, a wordless communication. This beast, he wasn't mindless. That meant there was hope, a dangerous, exhilarating hope. Chapter 8, The Weight of Words. Truth be told, the realization that the beast was not mindless scared Sara almost as much as his initial ferocity. What if he was just playing with her, a cat toying with a mouse? What if his intelligence made him even more dangerous, more cunning? Still, she couldn't stop herself. She kept talking to him. Soft words whispered into the echoing halls, carried on the frigid air like fragile, crystalline bells. She spoke of the mundane, the biting cold, the crumbling tapestries, the ever-present dust motes dancing in the faint light. She spoke of the pervasive loneliness that felt like a second skin, a constant ache in her soul. And then one afternoon, she found herself speaking of her lost memories, the gaping hole in her past that defined her present. "I don't remember who I was," she murmured, her voice thick with an old, familiar sorrow. She sat near the ruined fireplace, wrapped in her threadbare cloak, staring into the flickering embers of a small, carefully built fire. "It's like a piece of me is just gone. A whole life erased." She didn't expect a response, not verbally, but she felt a shift in the air, a presence that was closer, more attentive. One day, while exploring a ruined library she discovered in a rarely used wing of the castle, her fingers brushed against a precarious stack of brittle, forgotten scrolls. The crash echoed like thunder in the quiet hall, sending her heart leaping into her throat. She froze, expecting the beast's immediate wrath, his furious roar. Moments later, a shadow fell across the doorway. Lycan King. He stood there, immense and still, his golden eyes fixed on her. He didn't growl. He didn't lunge. He simply watched, his massive chest heaving with slow, deliberate breaths. The air thickened with unspoken tension. Then, a low hump sound, almost a sigh, rumbled from his throat. It wasn't accusatory, but rather a sound of deep, resigned melancholy. Just like that, he turned, melting back into the shadows. Sara slowly let out the breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. He hadn't attacked. He had observed. This was a monumental shift in their unspoken dynamic. It confirmed her growing suspicion. He wasn't purely feral. There was something else, something hidden deep inside the monstrous form. A mind, perhaps even a consciousness, that understood more than it let on. As a result, her fear began to intertwine with a profound, almost desperate curiosity. She didn't know what it meant, but it was a glimmer, a faint light in the suffocating darkness of her isolation. It meant he was more than a curse. He was a being trapped within one. That night, she found a small, intricately carved wooden bird near where she'd left his food. Its feathers were detailed with exquisite care, its eyes tiny, polished stones. It was clearly old, a relic from the castle's forgotten past, yet perfectly preserved. Had the beast placed it there for her? A shiver, not of fear, but of profound wonder, went through her. This gift, this small, beautiful thing, was a silent answer to her whispered words, a wordless conversation. It was a language without words, a tangible connection in the terrifying silence. Sara clutched the bird. Its smooth, cool, was surprisingly warm in her palm. The simple act melted a piece of the icy wall around her heart. It was a tangible sign that her efforts were being seen, perhaps even understood, by the beast. What did this mean for her, for him, for their terrifying, unspoken bond? Chapter 9. The Whispering Garden. Driven by the discovery of the wooden bird, a new hope blossomed within Sara, fragile as a winter flower pushing through hardened snow. It was an audacious hope, but one she couldn't ignore. She decided to explore a section of a faded, brittle castle map she'd found in the ruined library, a delicate drawing of what looked like a courtyard, tucked away in a rarely used corner of the fortress. Soon after, following the ancient winding paths, she stumbled upon it, a hidden, overgrown garden nestled within tall, crumbling stone walls. Despite the perpetual winter that gripped the world outside, pockets of resilient evergreens and hardy, dormant roses clung to life here, protected by the castle's ruined, embracing walls. The air in this courtyard felt different, less frigid, almost hopeful, as if holding its breath for spring. Even now, amidst the snow and ice, she saw the promise of spring, a testament to enduring life. She began to spend her afternoons there, drawn by an inexplicable pull. She cleared debris, carefully tending to the hardy plants, coaxing life from the frozen ground. The simple act of pulling weeds, of uncovering forgotten shoots, was a meditation, a small, tangible victory against the overwhelming desolation that pervaded the castle. It was a quiet rebellion, a reclaiming of beauty. One crisp afternoon, as she hummed a tune she faintly recalled from her forgotten past, a lullaby, perhaps a whisper of a mother's love. She felt it, a presence, not a threat, not exactly, but a heavy, watchful stillness that permeated the air. She didn't turn around right away. Her pulse raced, a frantic drumbeat against her ribs. As if summoned by her very thoughts, Lycan King Scott emerged. He stepped out from behind a snow-laden evergreen, his massive form silhouetted against the soft, muted light of the courtyard. He stood there, immense and shadowed, his golden eyes fixed on her. He didn't approach. He didn't retreat. He just watched, his massive chest rising and falling with slow, rhythmic breaths, a silent, powerful guardian. Sara cautiously continued her work, humming the lullaby a little louder, infusing it with a desperate hope. She didn't look at him directly, not wanting to break the delicate spell. "It's a beautiful garden, isn't it?" she murmured, pulling a persistent weed, her voice soft and even. "Even in winter, there's so much life here, so much promise." The beast let out a low, rumbling sound. It wasn't a growl. It was a deep sigh, a sound of contentment, of profound, perhaps forgotten, peace. He slowly lowered himself to the ground, settling his massive form near the edge of the courtyard, still watching her, his head resting on his colossal paws. This was it, their first truly shared space, a fragile truce born in a hidden haven. Sara felt a profound sense of wonder, a strange, almost maternal protectiveness towards this tormented creature. She saw his vulnerability, not just his savagery, not just the monster. What's worse, she felt a powerful, undeniable connection, something that resonated with the forgotten pieces of her own soul, pulling her deeper into his mystery. As the wind shifted, carrying the scent of pine and damp earth, Scott let out a soft, almost mournful whine, a sound that resonated deep within her, a pull she couldn't explain. He was still a monster, but she felt drawn to his brokenness, to the deep, ancient sorrow in his golden eyes. This was no longer just about survival. It was about something far more profound, something that defied reason. Chapter 10, The Moonpetal's Promise. The wooden bird, a tiny carved whisper of forgotten beauty, rested in Sara's palm, a tangible reminder of the unspoken bond growing between her and Lycan King Scott. It gave her courage, a fragile yet potent spark of resolve. She wanted to help him. She couldn't just watch him suffer, a silent, tormented giant. His agonizing whimper in the garden had pierced her soul, awakening a fierce need to alleviate his pain. So, she began searching the castle library anew, driven by a desperate urgency. She pulled dusty, leather-bound books from crumbling shelves, her fingers tracing ancient scripts, looking for anything about herbs, about healing, about curses. She found old drawings of wolves, powerful and proud, and stories of Lycans, some tragic, some triumphant, tales that echoed with a strange familiarity. Her own memory was still a gaping hole, a void waiting to be filled, but these old tales felt like echoes stirring something deep within her, tantalizing fragments of a lost world. After days of relentless searching, she found it, a tattered book detailing ancient remedies, its pages brittle with age. One plant, a small leafy green called moonpetal, caught her eye. Its illustration showed delicate, almost luminous leaves. The text promised it would soothe deep wounds and calm fevered spirits. She knew where to find it. She'd seen similar plants, hardy and resilient, clinging to life in the hidden garden, nestled near the evergreens. With every heartbeat, her resolve grew stronger, pushing aside the fear that still lingered. She found the moon petal, its delicate leaves frosted but alive, vibrant even in the heart of winter. Clutching them carefully, she approached Scott's lair, a dark, deeper alcove where he often rested, a place even more shadowed than the dining hall. He was there, a massive slumped shadow, his breaths ragged, each inhale a struggle. The wound on his flank looked worse, a raw, angry red, weeping a dark fluid. Sara's stomach churned with a mix of fear and nausea, but she pushed her fear down, deep inside. She had to try. She knelt slowly, carefully, a small, vulnerable figure beside the colossal beast. "It's for the pain," she murmured, her voice soft as falling snow, barely a whisper. Please let me help. She didn't know what scared her more, his pain, raw and evident, or his potential reaction to her touch. She reached out, her fingers trembling as they brushed his matted fur. It was coarse, surprisingly warm, a vibrant heat beneath her fingertips. A low growl rumbled deep in his chest, a warning, a sound of ancient power. But it wasn't aggressive. It was a sound of profound agony, a plea disguised as a threat. As she began to apply the cool, crushed leaves to the wound, Scott's massive body tensed. Without warning, he let out a guttural shriek, a sound of pure, unadulterated torment that tore through the quiet hall. He thrashed, his massive head throwing back, not at her, but at the crumbling ceiling. His golden eyes, usually so wild and pained, were suddenly filled with tears, glistening in the faint light filtering through the high windows. In that moment, she saw it clear as day, a human expression of agony etched onto a beast's face. He was in so much pain, suffering beyond anything she could comprehend. He collapsed, then, whimpering, his massive body trembling with residual pain, a broken, vulnerable giant. Sara stared, her own heart aching, tears blurring her vision. He wasn't just a beast. He was a king trapped inside one. That's why his torment was so profound. Chapter 11, The Sunbeam Truce. After Lycan King Scott's tormented outburst, Sara spent the next few days with a fierce, newfound determination. She wasn't just an offering anymore. She was a healer. She continued applying the moon petal, more confident now, her movements steady and sure. She understood his pain, not just as a physical ailment, but as a deep, soul-crushing agony. The plant worked its magic. The angry red of the wound slowly receded, and a thin scab began to form over the raw flesh. The faint, clean scent of the moon petal replaced the odor of infection. With every step she took, her hope grew. He seemed calmer now, too. He no longer thrashed in his sleep, his dreams less haunted by whatever demons the curse had unleashed upon him. His breathing, once ragged and shallow, was smoother, deeper. One afternoon, she found him sleeping soundly in a single, brilliant sunbeam that pierced a broken window in the dining hall, illuminating a circle of the cold stone floor. The air thickened with a strange sense of peace. His dark fur looked softer in the faint light, less matted, almost shimmering. She knelt beside him, a fresh poultice of moon petal in hand. But as she reached for his flank, she hesitated. Instead, she began to gently stroke his head, her fingers tracing the thick fur around his powerful ears. His breathing hitched for a moment. He didn't wake, but a low, rumbling sound, surprisingly soft and deep, vibrated from his chest. It was a sound of pure, unadulterated contentment, a purr. Her touch was so gentle, so warm against his coarse fur. A powerful, almost electric jolt passed between them, a current of unspoken understanding. The purr grew louder, a deep, resonant hum that she felt in her own chest, a vibration that seemed to soothe the raw edges of her own loneliness. He was still a beast, a creature of immense power, but in this moment, under the warm gaze of the winter sun, he was simply a being grateful for a moment of peace, a moment of gentle contact. Sara felt a tear slide down her cheek, not of fear or sorrow, but of a strange, overwhelming sense of connection. For the first time since arriving at this tomb, she wasn't just surviving. She was finding something she never knew she had lost. Chapter 12, A Glimmer of a King. The healing of Scott's wound marked a profound shift in their dynamic. The purr in the sunbeam had been a turning point, a bridge of trust built across a chasm of fear and torment. Now, he was less a caged, wounded animal, and more a silent, watchful guardian. His golden eyes, though still holding a deep well of sorrow, now followed her with an intelligent, assessing gaze. He began to guide her. It started with a gentle nudge of his massive head, urging her down a corridor she hadn't dared to explore. She followed, her heart pounding a steady rhythm of caution and curiosity. He led her not to a grand hall or a treasure room, but to a small, secluded study in the western wing. Dust lay thick as a shroud over everything, but the room felt different. It was a place of thought, of intellect. A massive oak desk stood against one wall, its surface covered in faded maps and scrolls. Shelves overflowing with leather-bound books lined the other walls, their spines cracked and faded. And in the center of the desk, one single, large book was left open, as if its reader had been suddenly called away. Scott padded softly to the desk and, with a surprising delicacy, nudged the open book with his nose, his golden eyes flicking from the page to Sara. She stepped closer, her breath catching in her throat. The book was a history of the Lycan Kings, its pages filled with elegant, handwritten script. The open page wasn't about battles or conquests. It was a detailed passage on ancient curses, specifically those that targeted the royal bloodline. Her eyes scanned the text, her mind racing. It spoke of curses that didn't just transform the body, but shattered the mind, locking the true self away behind a wall of feral rage and pain. It mentioned triggers, anchors, and weaknesses. A cold dread mixed with a surge of adrenaline washed over her. This wasn't a random act. He was communicating. He was showing her what had been done to him. The king, trapped deep inside the beast, was fighting to be found. He was giving her a weapon, a key, if only she was smart enough to figure out how to use it. Chapter 13. The First Flash. The book on curses became Sara's obsession. She spent hours in the dusty study, poring over the ancient script, the beast often lying silently at the door, a massive, furry sentinel. The connection between them deepened with every passing day, an unspoken language of shared space and quiet understanding. One evening, she was tending to his wound, which was now almost fully healed, leaving a long, jagged scar. As she gently cleaned the fur around it, her hand rested on his powerful shoulder. He turned his head, and his golden eyes met hers. The look in them was different. The raw torment was still there, a shadow in their depths, but for a fleeting moment, something else shone through, a look of profound gratitude, of clear, intelligent recognition that went beyond instinct. In the span of a single, indrawn breath, Sara's mind was flooded. It wasn't a full memory, but a flash, vivid and startlingly real. She saw a man's face, strong, kind, with laughter lines crinkling around those same molten gold eyes. His lips moved, speaking a name she couldn't quite hear, but she felt it, a whisper against her soul. Scott. The name felt right, solid, true. The beast, still purring under her touch, nudged her hand with his nose, leaning into her touch, his massive body relaxing completely against hers. A different feeling, raw and untamed, pulled low in her belly. Desire. She felt it clear as day, a shocking and undeniable heat. This connection wasn't just about taming a beast. It was about something ancient, something powerful, something that her own body remembered even if her mind could not. The flash was gone as quickly as it came, leaving her dizzy and breathless, her heart hammering against her ribs. Who was that man? Who was Scott? The name echoed in the empty spaces of her mind. It was the first piece of her own puzzle, a single, brilliant star in a universe of darkness. And it was inextricably terrifyingly linked to the beast before her. Chapter 14. The Distant Horn. The fragile peace of their isolated world was shattered by a sound. It ripped through the quiet castle, harsh and blaring. A horn, not the mournful howl of a lone wolf or the cry of a beast, but a structured, powerful blast, followed by another and another. It was a signal, a call to arms, a sound of organized intent. Sara scrambled to a high, narrow, arrow-slit window, her heart skipping a beat, her breath caught in her throat. Outside, beyond the castle walls, she saw movement. Shadows danced between the snow-covered trees, tiny figures on horseback, their banners snapping in the harsh winter wind. A shiver of absolute dread went through her. This wasn't a rescue. This was an invasion. The banners were clear now, even from this distance. A snarling wolf's head, but subtly different from her old pack's mark, more aggressive, almost predatory, its fangs dripping with stylized blood. It was the sigil of a conquering pack, a ruthless force. The name Kais, whispered in fear by her old pack, a ruthless alpha who had been carving a bloody path through the northern territories, returned to her. He was here. Her world tilted. Beside her, Scott, who had woken with the first horn blast, was no longer purring. A growl rose in his throat, low and vibrating, a rumble of ancient warning that shook the very stone beneath her feet. His golden eyes, minutes before filled with a gentle tenderness, now blazed with a savage ferocity Sara hadn't seen since her first night. He positioned his massive body between her and the window, a silent, powerful shield. He was protecting her. It wasn't just instinct. It was a choice. It was him. Kais, Sara whispered, the name a bitter taste of ash in her mouth. She could almost imagine his sneering voice, the rumors of his cruelty, his ambition. He would see her as a pawn, a nothing, a prize to be claimed along with the castle. But she wasn't that person anymore. She was connected to this beast, this king. This terrifying truth was both a heavy burden and a strange, exhilarating source of power. Maybe it was fate that she, the forgotten one, would be the one to stand against the usurper. The rhythmic thud of hooves grew louder, closer. Kais's wolves were fast. They were here, and they were coming for the king. Chapter 15. A shield of fur and fury. The shouts of Kais's approaching pack tore through the frigid air like jagged claws. Sara's heart hammered against her ribs, but it wasn't just fear now. A different kind of fire, hot and defiant, bloomed beneath her skin. She wasn't an outcast sold for a debt anymore. She was the one protecting the tormented king. His golden eyes, filled with a fiercely protective rage directed outward for her sake, had sparked something powerful inside her. Scott. The name echoed in her mind, a quiet strength. Her immediate goal shifted from tending to the beast to preparing for battle. The stakes were no longer just her survival, but Scott's very existence. She had to fight. She had to defend this broken king, because he was now a part of her story, a part of her rediscovered self. The vast, cold halls of the castle, once her prison, now became their fortress. This way, she urged in an urgent whisper, tugging at a piece of tattered tapestry that hid a narrow, winding staircase she'd discovered in her explorations. Her hands, once fumbling and raw, now moved with a purpose she'd never known. Scott, despite his massive beastly form, seemed to understand completely. He followed without hesitation, his immense body squeezing through passages no normal wolf could navigate. He moved like a living shadow, surprisingly agile and utterly silent. This was the strength of a true Lycan, even one trapped by a curse. Together, They worked as a single unit. They barricaded rusted iron grates, pushed heavy, crumbling stone statues in front of strategic doorways. Each thud of stone against stone echoed her newfound resolve. She remembered the dusty old diagrams from the library, maps of the castle's defenses, its weak points, and its hidden strengths. She used them now, her mind clear, sharper than it had ever been. She pointed to blind spots in the battlements, showed him where loose stones could be dislodged to create a rock fall. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was fighting. She was leading. Because of that, a surge of power, unfamiliar yet exhilarating, coursed through her veins. She was reclaiming herself, not by remembering her past, but by forging a new future in the heart of the battle. The first of Kaisa's wolves were at the outer gate, their growls a hungry, violent chorus. Sara and Scott retreated to the shadows of the main hall, waiting, listening, two broken souls united against the coming storm. He was her shield of fur and fury, and she, in a way she was just beginning to understand, was his anchor of hope. They would face this together. Chapter 16, The First Wave. The ancient outer gate, weakened by centuries of neglect, groaned its last protest. With a deafening shriek of tortured metal and the splintering crash of thousand-year-old oak, it gave way. Kaisa's wolves poured into the courtyard, a snarling tide of dark fur and flashing claws. The air thickened, instantly with the scent of bloodlust and cold ambition. Sara and Scott were in the main hall, having retreated from the courtyard as planned. From a high archway, they watched the invaders swarm below. Sara's mind, once a fog of confusion, was now a razor's edge of clarity. She saw the patterns of their attack, the way they moved as a single brutal unit. "There," she whispered, her voice tight, pointing to a crumbling section of the overhead balcony. "The stones are loose." Scott didn't need to be told twice. He was a force of nature unleashed. With a roar that shook the very foundations of the castle, he launched himself up the grand staircase. He slammed his colossal body into the balcony's support pillar. Stone shrieked and groaned. With a second, thunderous impact, a section of the stone railing and floor gave way, crashing down onto a cluster of Kaisa's elite guards. The sickening crack of bone and pained yelps were swallowed by the din of battle. But more wolves surged forward, their numbers seemingly endless. They swarmed the main entrance, their claws scrabbling on the stone. Sara moved on instinct, her strategic mind working in tandem with Scott's raw power. She kicked over a heavy iron brazier, sending hot coals scattering across the floor, creating a temporary barrier of fire and smoke. A soldier, faster and more cunning than the others, broke through the chaos. He lunged for Sara, his knife glinting with malicious intent. Time seemed to stand still. Sara cried out, stumbling backward. Before she could move, Scott was there. He moved like a blur, a furious dark storm of teeth and claws. He slammed into the soldier, a thunderous roar tearing from his throat. The guard flew backward, hitting the stone wall with a final, definitive crack. Scott stood over Sara, his massive body trembling with controlled rage, shielding her completely. His golden eyes blazed, not with wild madness, but with a primal, possessive fire that burned straight to her soul. Mine. The unspoken word hung in the air between them, a declaration more powerful than any vow. In the brief lull that followed, surrounded by the scent of blood and stone dust, Sara knew this was a fight she would see through to the end, no matter the cost. Chapter 17, The Usurper's Voice. The initial brutal assault had been repelled, but the silence that fell over the castle was more menacing than the sounds of battle. Kais's forces had pulled back from the main hall, regrouping in the courtyard. They had underestimated the beast's power and his protector's ingenuity. Then a new attack began, one far more insidious. Kais's voice boomed through the castle, amplified by magic or some cruel Lycan trick, echoing off the stone walls and seeping into every shadow. Sara, surrender now. Give yourself to your true king. That thing cannot protect you. He is broken, just like your mind. His words were poison-tipped arrows, aimed directly at her deepest fears, her amnesia, her perceived uselessness. But instead of breaking her, they ignited a fierce, cold defiance. She wasn't broken. She had found a connection, a purpose. And Scott, he was far from useless. The voice, closer now, hissed from the courtyard. Come out, little Luna. Don't you remember your title? Or did that beast finally eat your last useful thought? Luna! The word hit Sara like a physical blow. Her thoughts spun. It was another whisper from her forgotten past, stronger than the flash of Scott's name had been. Why did he call her that? What did it mean? She felt a dizzying surge of conflicting emotions, confusion, fear, but also a deep, almost instinctual recognition, as though a locked door deep inside her had just been rattled, as though fate itself had just whispered a clue. What was her title? What had she forgotten? Beside her, Scott let out a low, pained, guttural sound. It wasn't a growl of anger, but of deep, ancient sorrow. He understood. He knew what the word meant, and the sound he made confirmed its terrible significance. He knew something she didn't, a secret that was clearly tied to their shared torment. Because of that, a new, desperate urgency filled her. She had to survive. She had to win, not just to save Scott, but to uncover the truth of who she was and what Kais had stolen from them both. Chapter 18. The Labyrinth Within. We have to move, Sara urged, tugging on Scott's massive paw. The open hall was a death trap. Kais knew where they were. Her instincts surged, pulling her deeper into the labyrinthine depths of the castle, towards the oldest, most forgotten chambers she had once explored out of lonely curiosity. Each echoing step on the cold stone floor felt like a journey back in time. The air grew heavier, thick with dust and ancient secrets. She felt a strange pull, a bizarre sense of familiarity with these hidden passages. It was as if her bones remembered the way, her feet finding purchase on stones they had tread a lifetime ago. This was more than just escaping. This was a return. They navigated twisting corridors and descended hidden staircases, the sounds of their pursuers fading, and then growing louder as Kais's wolves began their own search. The castle, once her prison, was now their only ally, its secrets their shield. They found refuge in a small, circular chamber hidden behind a collapsed section of the library wall. It was utterly silent, a pocket of stillness in the heart of the storm. Scott collapsed to the floor, his breathing heavy, the battle having taken a toll. Sara knelt beside him, placing a hand on his massive, heaving flank. He turned his head and rested it gently in her lap, his golden eyes closing. It was an act of complete and utter trust in the suffocating darkness. Surrounded by the threat of death, this one simple gesture was a profound declaration. He was her king, her beast, her protector. And she, in this moment, was his sanctuary. She stroked his fur, her own fear momentarily forgotten, replaced by a fierce, protective love. She didn't know how they would get out of this, but she knew she would not abandon him. They were bound together, two broken souls in a forgotten castle, and the faint, familiar feeling of these hidden halls whispered a promise. The answers were here, buried in the stone, waiting to be remembered. Chapter 19. A brother's betrayal. The ancient chambers, once a fleeting comfort, twisted into a cruel maze. Sara and Scott moved deeper, the air growing thick with the scent of decay and damp earth. But Kais, it seemed, knew these hidden ways even better than she had feared. He was like a poison seeping through the castle's very stone, anticipating their every move. A low, mocking laugh echoed through the darkness ahead of them. Playing hide-and-seek, little Luna, don't you remember our games, brother? The word hung in the air, a chilling, venomous revelation. Brother! An open loop, a new, terrifying piece of the puzzle snapping into place. Suddenly, lights flared. Torches held by Kais's wolves materialized from hidden alcoves, blinding them, trapping them in a dead-end passage. It was a perfectly executed trap. Kais himself emerged, stepping from a shadowed archway, his eyes cold as a winter night, fixed on Sara. His smile was sharp, predatory, like a wolf's fangs. "Got you!" Scott roared. It was a sound of pure, unadulterated fury and deep, soul-shattering betrayal that vibrated through the ancient stones. He lunged, a massive dark blur aimed at the source of his torment. But Kais was ready. He moved with a speed that shocked Sara. It wasn't a Lycan's brute force, but something else, something unnatural and fluid. He raised a hand, and as he did, Sara saw the truth. Kais wasn't just a powerful alpha. He was something more, something twisted. He was the source of the curse. The realization hit her a second before it happened. This wasn't a battle between rivals. This was the culmination of a family's hate, a brother's jealousy. Scott wasn't just fighting a usurper. He was fighting his own blood. Chapter 20. The Green Light of Ruin. As Scott lunged, a sickly green light flared from Kais's palm, striking the beast midair. It wasn't a physical blow. It was an attack on his very essence. The raw, dark magic ripped through him. Scott staggered, a pained whimper tearing from his throat, a sound so broken it shattered Sara's heart. He convulsed, his powerful limbs buckling as the curse was violently reactivated, reinforced by its creator. He hit the stone floor with a sickening thud. His body lay still, except for shallow, ragged breaths. His golden eyes, usually so bright with fierce life, were dimming, a flicker of awareness fading like a dying ember. No, Sara screamed. No matter how hard she tried, she couldn't reach him. Kais's wolves, a dozen or more, swarmed her, their hands grasping, pulling. She fought, her instincts surging, clawing and biting like a cornered animal. But she was only one against many. They dragged her away, pulling her further from Scott towards his triumphant brother. Her heart pounded so loudly she thought it might explode. This was it, her greatest fear, losing him, seeing him helpless. It was a major setback, a crushing defeat. Kais stood over her, his boot pressing lightly on her pinned arm. His face, once handsome, was now twisted with triumph and a chilling cruelty. Such a pretty little fool. Kais purred, his voice slick as oil. You almost had him, almost brought him back from the brink. He knelt, his cold eyes locking onto hers. But not quite, because you couldn't remember, could you? You couldn't remember what truly binds him, what truly breaks the curse. He paused, letting the words sink in, wanting her to feel the full weight of his power, the utter despair of her own ignorance. You weren't just his mate, Sara, he continued, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper meant for her ears alone, a final, devastating blow. You were his wife, his queen. Before I took it all away, a cold, hard knot formed in Sara's stomach. The truth unraveled, brutal and absolute. She saw flashes, not full memories, but fleeting, agonizing images. A sunlit clearing, the warmth of a strong hand in hers, a promise whispered under a crescent moon. Her chest ached with a pain so profound it stole her breath. You did this, she choked out, tears blurring her vision. Rage, hot and blinding, flared through her. He had stolen her life. He had stolen their life. He had stolen her very self. Oh, yes, Kais leaned closer, his scent cloying, triumphant. The attack, the curse, and your pretty little mind wiped clean. A blank slate. So much easier to steal a throne when its Luna doesn't even remember. She is a Luna. He laughed, a short, sharp bark of victory. Now watch as your beast dies, and you will be mine. Chapter 21. The Roar That Shattered Memory. Kais stood, gesturing to his soldiers. Finish it, and the beast. Sara screamed, a guttural sound of raw, primal despair. She writhed against her captors, her pleas dying in her throat as a rough hand clamped over her mouth. Her goal was to save Scott, but she was powerless, a pawn in a game she hadn't even known she was playing. Her memories were returning, but it was too late. This was her lowest point, the absolute nadir of her existence. Kais's men, grim-faced and obedient, approached the fallen form of Scott. Their blades glinted in the torchlight. Sara's heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat of terror. She couldn't look away. Every breath was a choked sob. The revelation of her forgotten marriage, her stolen past, her stolen love. It was overwhelming, a tidal wave of grief and betrayal that threatened to drown her. Her head spun. She felt utterly broken, consumed by this devastating truth. She was his queen, and she had forgotten him. She had lost 5 years. 5 years of his suffering, 5 years of her own emptiness. And now, he would die because of her failure to remember. Just as the first soldier raised his blade, a roar erupted from Scott. It wasn't the tormented beast growl from before. It was a sound of pure, desperate defiance, a sound of agony and love intermingled. It was a guttural, primal scream that shook the very foundations of the castle, a final, despairing call. Scott! Sara's mind screamed his name. The name from her fleeting memory now anchored itself in her rediscovered consciousness. The roar wasn't just sound. It was a wave of pure, untamed magic, a final surge of Scott's fading power. It smashed against her mind, and the walls came down. The fragments of memory, the whispers, the fleeting images, they crashed together, shattering the amnesiac prison around her forgotten past. She saw it all. Their wedding, a joyous blur of white flowers and green forest. His strong, kind smile as he placed a ring on her finger. Her hand in his. Their first dance under the twin moons. The scent of pine and his unique, comforting warmth. Then the attack. Kais's cruel, jealous smile. The flash of dark green magic. Scott's scream as he transformed, his body twisting, breaking, her own mind shattering into a million pieces as a secondary curse struck her. She collapsed, overwhelmed by the vivid, painful return of her past. Tears streamed down her face, a torrent of rediscovered love and relived trauma. She was still bound. Scott was still a beast, barely breathing. Kais stood victorious. The goal seemed impossible. In the quiet that followed, Sara lay in the dust, her world a whirlwind of remembered joy and rediscovered pain. She had found her memories, but it felt like she had lost everything else. Chapter 22. The Queen's Voice. Sara lay on the cold stone floor, the taste of dust and tears in her mouth. Kais's cruel laughter echoed around her, but it faded, drowned out by the thunder of her own returning past. The pain was unbearable, a fresh wound carved into her soul. Yet, amidst the agony, a fierce, burning resolve ignited. She wasn't weak. Her amnesia hadn't made her useless. It had been a weapon used against her. She understood it all now. She looked at Scott, still a broken beast on the floor, his breaths shallow. Kais stood over him, a triumphant sneer twisting his lips, about to deliver the final blow himself. No matter how hard she tried, she couldn't break free from her bonds. But then a thought, clear as crystal, cut through her despair. Her voice, filled with love and memory, was the anchor. The book had spoken of anchors, of emotional tethers that could fight a curse. Their bond wasn't just physical, it was soul deep. She felt it clear as day. She was Luna's Sara, Scott's queen, and her love was the key. Kais was a shadow looming over Scott, his hand glowing with that sick green light. But then Sara's voice, though still rough with tears, cut through the air, clear and strong. "Scott," she cried, his true name ringing out like a bell in the dead silence. It had been 5 years since it was spoken with love in this castle. "My king, remember me?" Kais froze, his head snapping towards her, his eyes narrowing. "Silence, you fool," he snarled, taking a step towards her. His loyalists moved to silence her, but she ignored them, her gaze fixed on the broken beast. She needed to reach him because her very soul depended on it. "Do you remember the star-kissed grove?" she pleaded, her voice trembling yet resolute, pouring every ounce of her rediscovered love into her words. "Our vows, Scott, under the twin moons. The silver threads we wove into our fur. You promised me forever." Scott's beastly form began to convulse. A low, guttural moan ripped from his throat. It was a sound of immense struggle, a battle raging within him. The curse was fighting back, but Sara didn't stop. "The carved bird you gave me," she cried, remembering the small wooden token. "You said it was a symbol of my freedom, my spirit. You said I was your sky. Scott, come back to me." Kais roared, a sound of pure fury. "Silence her now," he shrieked at his men. But it was too late. The tremor through the floor, the deep thrumming in the air. The very castle seemed to hum with ancient power, responding to its true queen. Chapter 23. The Rebirth of the King. Scott's struggle intensified. His massive beastly form writhed on the floor, a whirlwind of dark fur and tormented muscle. The ground trembled. A strange shimmering light, sickly green and vibrant gold, pulsed around him as the curse battled against the returning king. Sara heard the snapping of bone, the tearing of muscle, but it wasn't a sound of agony now. It was a sound of change. It was the sound of rebirth. "Fight it, Scott," she screamed, her voice raw, tears of hope streaming down her face. "Come back to me. Come back to your queen." Kais, enraged and desperate, lunged for her, his eyes burning. He knew he was losing. This was his last chance to sever their connection. But then a blinding flash of golden light erupted from Scott's struggling form, momentarily engulfing the entire hall, pushing back the shadows, pushing back Kais's snarling form. The climax was here. Sara shielded her eyes, her heart aching with a desperate, terrifying hope. When the light faded, the beast was gone. In its place stood a man, tall, powerful, and utterly magnificent. His hair, dark as midnight, framed a face etched with the pain of 5 long years. But his golden eyes, those familiar, soul-deep golden eyes, were clear, intelligent, and filled with a fierce, unwavering love for her. "Sara," he rasped, his voice raw from disuse, but unmistakably human. He reached out, his hand no longer a claw, and broke her bonds with a single sharp snap. Freedom! A profound tremor of relief went through her. Kais screamed, a sound of pure, desperate rage. "No! I cursed you!" He lunged for Scott, his own body shifting into a corrupted, weaker Lycan form. But Scott met him. The fight was brutal, a whirlwind of muscle and fury. Scott fought with the coiled power of a king denied, 5 years of torment fueling every single blow. As they clashed, Sara remembered something from her past, a hidden weakness, a secret about Kais's dark magic gleaned from a forgotten conversation. She cried out, "His left side! Scott! The source of his magic is a stolen relic embedded there." It was a gamble. It was a memory. Scott heard her. He feigned a strike to Kais's right, then twisted, slamming his fist into his brother's left flank. A shriek of agony ripped from Kais. His corrupted form flickered, then collapsed, the stolen power withering away. Scott stood over him, victorious, breathing heavily, but undeniably himself. The central conflict was resolved. Chapter 24, The Echoes of a Kingdom. The sudden silence in the great hall was deafening, thick with the scent of ozone and the aftermath of battle. Kais lay unmoving, reduced to a whimpering, unconscious human, his magical power drained, his treachery laid bare. Scott, now fully human, turned to Sara. His golden eyes, filled with a raw, overwhelming emotion, drank her in. He was here. He was him. "My Luna," he murmured, his voice thick with 5 years of unspoken longing, and pulled her into his arms. The embrace was fierce, desperate, a collision of past and present. Sara buried her face in his shoulder, inhaling his scent, pine, snow, and a deep, comforting warmth that was uniquely Scott. Tears, hot and uncontrollable, streamed down her face, a mix of relief, exhaustion, and overwhelming joy. This was the man from her memories. This was her husband. This was her king. From the shadows, a few old, wizened wolves emerged, trembling but with hope shining in their eyes. They were Scott's loyalists, who had hidden in the forgotten corners of the castle for years, awaiting his return. They knelt, tears flowing freely. "My king," they whispered, their voices hoarse with reverence. Scott nodded, his gaze never leaving Sara's face, but acknowledging their loyalty. "Secure him," he commanded, his voice firm, the sound of a true leader. "He will answer for his treachery." Then he turned back to Sara, his hand gently tracing the lines of her cheek. "We have much to discuss, my love. 5 years. They were stolen from us." Sara leaned into his touch, her heart finally, blessedly, at peace. She knew it would be a long road, filled with difficult conversations and the painful rebuilding of a shattered kingdom. But now they would face it together. Chapter 25, The King and His Forgotten Queen. Months later, the Lycan King's castle was no longer a desolate tomb. Workmen bustled through the halls, repairing shattered walls, replacing brittle tapestries, and rekindling ancient hearths. The air hummed with activity, with the scent of fresh mortar and the promise of blooming life. It wasn't merely a restoration of stone. It was the rebirth of a spirit. Sara stood beside Scott in the newly grand throne room. Sunlight streamed through sparkling clean windows, illuminating the intricate carvings on their shared throne. She no longer wore the rough clothes of an outcast. Instead, she wore simple, elegant gowns, gifts from the wolves who had returned, eager to serve their true queen. Her memories, once a fractured puzzle, were now whole, a rich, vibrant tapestry of love, loss, and incredible resilience. She was Sara, Luna of the Moonstone Lycans, and her past, once a source of shame, was now her greatest strength. It had shown her everything she had overcome. Their reign was not built on fear, but on a love that had defied a curse, memory loss, and unimaginable betrayal. It became a legend whispered among all the Lycan packs, the story of the Beast King and the Forgotten Queen, who had saved him with a memory. Scott, now fully the king he was meant to be, often found her in the restored garden. He would watch her tend the moon petal, the very plant that had first soothed his torment. He would pull her close, burying his face in her hair. "My Luna," he'd murmur, the words of blessing, a promise, a prayer of gratitude. Years melted into decades. The Lycan King and his forgotten Luna became more than just rulers. They became the cornerstone of a new golden age. Their castle, vibrant and thriving, stood as a beacon of enduring love. Their children, strong and bright-eyed, played in the very halls where their father had once roamed as a beast and their mother had clung to a fading hope. Sara, now with silver threads woven into her own dark hair, often sat by the fire, watching Scott. He was still her king, still her mate, still the man whose golden eyes held the entire universe for her. She would sometimes think of the young, scared orphan who arrived at that desolate castle, a girl with no past and no future. She often wondered how she could have been so blind to the love story written in her own forgotten heart, the love story that had, in the end, saved them both. Their bond was not just love. It was a profound connection that had reshaped their world, becoming a legend whispered through generations.